And I wrote, I'm struggling. I'm hurting. I'm in pain. I never heard a thing from him. And I'm 57. And that was when I was, 16, 17. And I still remember that. I still remember
didn't reach out when you were...
nobody reached out to me when I needed help. But what if you're practicing depression? What if you're practicing anxiety? What if you're practicing fear? Are you literally not getting a black belt in chronic anxiety? Knowing I was going to become a father, that I said, I got to get my life together. I have to do this, if nothing else, than for him. That's a great motivator. If your intention is to heal, you'll find healing.
So what was the darkness and the pain specifically that you started your process in hypnotherapy wanting to remove?
It really came down to...
Welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now. I love to have real, raw conversations with people who are willing to get honest, who are willing to actually look inside, and who are also in paths where they're creating some level of unique impact or influence in the world. And today, our guest is no different. He and I had a chance to join on my live show that I do every single Friday, and had a great conversation. There was instant connection, and obviously the depth was just there. This is an individual who specializes in hypnotherapy and does so in a really unique way, but also is using his gift, his skill, and his trained ability to be able to help people identify and remove emotional blocks, intellectual blocks, things that they may not even have conscious understanding or awareness of. And he does so in a way that's just there to help people understand how to move through pain that we all experience in life. And so, Craig, I just so much enjoyed our conversation, and I'm really looking forward to going deeper with you today, my friend.
Yeah, Brian, I'm really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to doing this in person. We've been going back and forth for a while, so I'm excited to be here in person with you. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, it's always my preference as well, is to do in person versus virtual. Like, virtual is real. It gives us an ability to reach people. It allows all these logistical things to work. However, there's no replacing being in person with people. And so, though I can't do it with everybody, the fact that you were able to be in Phoenix and let us know worked out perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm really excited about that. Yeah. I obviously introduced you more through the light of what you do on the tail end of a little bit about how I experienced you. But the only question that I ask every single guest on this show is, who are you in your words?
Oh, okay. Well, I am somebody who is very conscious of wanting to become better. And I think that comes from struggling a lot in my teenage years with depression and anxiety. My mother struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts, as did I during my teenage years. And it kind of lit a fire under me at some point down the road to get better. And we're talking like the 1980s when I was in high school. And nowadays you have all the Prozacs and the SSRI drugs that you can take, all the medications, but those actually didn't come out till the mid 90s, the late 90s. So in the 1980s, you really didn't have anything other than, say, talk therapy, whatever book you could find at the bookstore or the library. And, a teenager, 15-year-old's not going to, do either of those stuff. And so after a while, it just sort of felt like this is who I am. It's like wearing an uncomfortable coat, but I guess that's just the way it's going to be. And so it was really the birth of my son in the year 2000, where, my wife told me she's pregnant. And it was very exciting. And it was also scary because I struggle with depression and anxiety. My mother struggled with depression and anxiety. So whether it's nature or nurture, whether it's a genetic thing or just mirroring what I saw in the home, my son has a good chance of having this struggle himself. And so it really came about due to the birth of my son, or, knowing I was going to become a father, that I said, I got to get my life together. I have to do this, if nothing else, than for him. And that's a great motivator.
It is.
And so I started doing work. Now, this is 2000. We got the internet at that point, a very rough version of the internet. But, you have research and blog posts and people discussing this stuff out in the open at that point. And there's exercises and techniques and strategies and skills to learn where you can turn it around. You can take back control. And one of the things I was using, since you already introduced me as to doing therapeutic hypnosis is I was doing hypnosis, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, over our conversation, but it's nothing scary. It's nothing that takes control over you, but gives you back control. And it was one of the things I use amongst other tools that really helped me, well, take back control and feel better. And yes, it took effort, and it took a certain relentlessness, and it still does to a certain, and I think with anything in life, whether you're a black belt in Taekwondo, or you're, a guitar player, or you're doing dance or any sort of athletics, there's a relentlessness to wanting to master that. I'm not saying everybody has to get a gold medal or everything, but if you want to master, chess, or you want to master martial arts, or you have to practice. And this goes towards even a certain mindset or a feeling state, emotional state. That does take practice. What is strongest within your mind is what you do over and over again. You discuss that all the time. And you know that, and the people who are listening to this, watching this, know that. What you practice, you get better at. What's strongest within your mind is what you do over and over again. But what if you're practicing depression? What if you're practicing anxiety? What if you're practicing fear? Are you literally not getting a black belt in chronic anxiety? And that's one of the things I work with people. And I was just the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I was working with a 77-year-old woman, and just anxiety. Okay, that's what we work on. I send people an intake form. I said, what do you want to work on? What's going to make you better? And whether it's physical pain or phobias and fears or anxiety or stress or wounds that may have occurred even back in childhood. And some people write 7 paragraphs of what they want to work on. Other people may just say one word, anxiety. Fine, that's what we work on. We're going to work on what you want to work on, because who knows you better than you? If your intuition is telling you just to work on the anxiety, then that's what we work on. And so we, it's appointment time, and we're getting ready to start the session, needing a little more clarity just to understand what we're working on. Is this anxiety that started last couple of months, last couple of years? She says, I've been struggling with this since I was 19. The 77-year-old woman is struggling since she was 19, some 50 years of this. And this is what happens day in, day out. People have been suffering and struggling for decades, and they don't realize that they can stop it. They can end it.
No, they don't need to suffer anymore.
Yeah, it's possible, because it's not who you are. It's a mindset or a chemistry issue within your brain. But if it's due to wounding or hurt that may have occurred, whether again, it's last month, last year, or 50, 60, 70 years ago, you're allowed to do something about it.
That's right.
And so I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but that the question you asked me 10 minutes ago, but what I love about this work and how it helped me in terms of who Craig Meriwether is, it gave me the tools to fix myself. And that's not to say don't ask for help. Absolutely have your team, and get a team of Avengers. Just don't work with Iron Man. Get everybody on your team. But this also gives you back control. And that's what's extraordinary about it.
So many of the things you say, I resonate deeply with, not only from my own experience, but in all the work that I do with other people. And, one of the things that you really highlighted, there's a couple in there that I'm going to pull out, but a couple things that I see is so frequently people will live for decades, not able to change their current state, not able to heal, not able to feel better, not able to feel worthy, right? And all of these pieces that kind of go into it. So like to your point, you're working with a 77-year-old that for 50 years has just been reinforcing the same patterns. And again, when you're reinforcing the same patterns, all it does is show you further evidence in your life that supports your flawed beliefs to begin with. And I say flawed, broken beliefs in most cases, because it's typically rooted in pain. So there's this piece that's huge. I think the other side that I want to acknowledge, and I think that's interesting though, is that, we're not taught this stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Even still today. You talked about the difference in the ability to take a pill, right? And a lot of the medications that can help with the chemical state on the side of it that didn't exist when you were a teenager, right? That you experienced with depression and anxiety and all of these pieces. Back then, it was less acceptable to talk about it. Right. It was societally less accepted, especially for a man to show any kind of feeling or emotion, right? And so the intake of the pills in the 90s didn't change the system in a way that also taught us how to actually work through this. It was a pill to address the chemical side that also then I think can be abused in many other situations above and beyond that. And so one of the things that I want to reinforce about what you said is that I was recently working with a client who, and I believe that this is the pattern that I see happen on both sides of the dynamic of what we just talked about, is the amount of shame that people, one, experience because of society, two, because of what's placed on them. But then even in the process of their inability to emotionally regulate, they judge how difficult it is and how bad they are at it.
Yeah.
And I was sitting with my client who has probably had 10,000 hours on the golf course. He's not a golf pro, but he's a scratch golfer.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just got him to sit with, and I asked him and really broke down, hey, if you get a hitch in your swing, how do you correct it?
Yeah.
Right. And he was able to really, like, with detail go, it's like, well, it's awareness. I understand. I can feel this stuff out. Now okay, great. Go back to the very beginning. Right? Where did the instruction start? Where did the lesson start? When did you start be able to recognize the muscle memory? Like all of the patterns that helped him understand the 35 years of golf he's played, put him in a position to know how to do it now, because he not only was taught, but he does teach. And then when I flipped it on him, I said, now, when were you taught how to emotionally regulate yourself? How many hours of practice have you had at that? How many instructors have you had to help you figure out your hitches? And he's like, well, none.
Yeah.
Right. So the shame piece, I also see as a really critical piece that wedges and traps people in. And so through the work that you do with not just hypnotherapy, but NLP and so many other modalities that you've learned to be able to help people in this path, where is it that you see shame showing up most for people? And how are you able to guide them and help them alleviate the shame to open up opportunity for growth?
What I find with a lot of people, not everybody, of course, but a lot of people, it's the wounds that we've been carrying since childhood. It's that 0 to 7, 0 to 10-year-old time frame when we're figuring out or being taught or shown who we are.
Yeah.
Whether it's the home and whether it's politics or we're in a religious household, we're being shown the world, and it's being molded for us by the people around us, of course, parents and siblings and friends and bullies and religious authorities and things like this. And so if you're hurt at some point, and it could be serious, if you're abused as a child in any sort of way, emotionally, mentally, or my God, physically, you may be carrying that because, maybe nobody believes you. Or why would they believe you that the teacher or uncle, whoever, or did that? They don't want to believe. So if you're not believed, then you can hold on to that hurt and pain because could be a form of protection.
Yep.
It's just like, it's a lot of the things like with weight gain. 10 pounds overweight, 25, I got to lose some COVID weight. We were doing a lot of brownies and margaritas during the last few years just for fun, breaking bread and the whole thing. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, what happened? And so, I got to lose some pounds. And so, okay, yeah, you can get a little bit overweight, but sometimes when you have that extraordinary weight gain, it's not so much unhealthy eating, but it's armoring yourself.
Yep.
And whether it's as extreme as, well, if I was attractive and got abused, sexually abused, then if I'm not attractive, that will never happen again. And it's not that it was thought out and you wrote a plan and you had a 10-point, bullet point plan on how to do this. It's just that unconscious part of mind is taking over, because that, according to neuroscience, that's the biggest part of mind.
Yep.
95% of mind is the unconscious. 5% is the conscious mind. And not to denigrate talk therapy or anything, that can be so helpful and so useful, and that should be part of your team. You always need a coach with everything. Any gold medal winner has a coach. Every, Pavarotti, considered the greatest opera singer of his time, was going to a vocal coach every year. And so it's always great to have that second pair of eyes, whether it's relationship coaching or business or marketing or let alone health. But the issue is when you go to a talk therapist and you're talking about the hurt and the pain, you may not really understand what the foundational issue is, what the origin is. And so you just end up spinning your wheels sometimes. And with hypnotherapy, we're the last on the list. We get the people who have no more hope. This is it. They've done everything. They've done the talk therapy for years and years and years. They've gone to the doctors. They don't understand why the back pain is still there. There's no medical reason for it. They've talked about all the problems in their life, about their relationships, about, blocking their success, and yet they're still in pain 2 years later after 90 sessions. And somebody points out, or they read an article in a magazine or see a blog post or something, hypnotherapy, I guess. And it's literally they're out of options. And what's fascinating about this work is I don't have to figure out the person. I don't have to figure out why you're holding on to shame or to hurt or to pain or to anger or to anxiety or whatever you want, tension, the pressure, the humiliation, the embarrassment. You know what the problem is. Maybe not consciously, but it's there within the unconscious. And that's what's extraordinary about this work. We're not going to talk about it. There are other people who can do that kind of work and do it very successfully and do it very well. But that's not what we would do in a therapeutic hypnosis session. You know what the problem is. And more importantly, you know what to do about it. And that's one of the things. Like, no one's ever told you that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that is, I think, hinders our success and our progress in this realm is that we look outside of ourselves to somebody else. And you need that sometimes. See somebody like yourself. Or, certainly if I break my leg, take me to the doctor. If I'm in a car accident, take me to the doctor. My appendix is about to burst, take me to the emergency room. But in terms of the hurt and pain, if you don't know what's causing it, if you don't know what it's from, what are you talking about? You're talking about a problem, maybe at work or in your relationship or at school or whatever. But you're not talking about the problem. And whether it's, happened a year ago or 50 years ago, 60 years ago, you know what it is.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating to me, the similarity in the language that you use to a lot of the language that we use. Right. And, up to and including, right, the whole lesson that we teach around the second you protect yourself, you actually guarantee you're going to disconnect yourself, not just from who you are and what you want, but from being seen and understood and connected at the deepest level. And what I appreciate is how you're able to speak to all these areas where the unconscious blocks show up as a result of the need to protect ourselves. Right. And to your point, it's even interesting because I often tell the story about when I came out of the hospital with a teddy bear in between my arms and people would ask me what happened to me. And I would tell them I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn from my body. 99% of them would pause and turn to my parents for validation, which told me that they didn't believe me. And that was what consistently was reinforced, is even as I'm living and existing in my truth, it's not going to be accepted. It's not going to be believed. Right. And again, mine is a very tangible, transparent impact that I can speak to in a moment. But that I do believe is that it's this area where who we are or who we intend to be not being accepted and believed in the world is often what creates the need to protect that at the core. And so I really appreciate the way you talk about it. I am a big believer, and I say this often, I do think that talk therapy is very productive and helpful. And there are some really good therapists out there that don't necessarily fall into this dynamic, but many people, when they go to talk therapy, to say it differently than how you did, end up becoming more aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves instead of understanding what to do about it. Right. And it just continues to separate in that problem. So what I'd like to know, and we're going to come full circle to this as it relates to like how you're helping people compress time in this area, is when was the first time in your life that you were conscious that you weren't being believed based on something about who you were?
That's an interesting question. When you're talking about that, it reminds me of Sesame Street. And depending on how old you are when you're listening, how old you are when you're listening to this. But back in the day, Big Bird had his friend Snuffleupagus. Well, back in the original incarnation, he was his invisible friend. or not so much invisible as he'd always seem to disappear when other people came about. And so Big Bird would be talking and Snuffleupagus comes out the back door, out the gate or whatever, and they talk and have a thing, and then he disappears and, oh, I was just talking to my friend Snuffle, and they're like, nobody believed him. And they ended that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Because they realize what they're teaching kids is that they may not be believed.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, whether it's a few months or a few years later, Snuffleupagus got to meet everybody, and they realized he was real because they were afraid that they were teaching children that they won't be believed if they start talking about something extraordinary, like their friend Snuffleupagus. And so in terms of your question, I remember one of the things that hurt the most was in high school. I went to a private school. And not that this matters one way or another, but it was a Baptist run school. Went to Episcopal church and born in Episcopal church and went to a Baptist high school. So I was quite indoctrinated into the religious aspect. And those are two head-butting.
Yeah, I was just going to say
philosophy.
It seems like conflict in and of itself.
And I remember I was in real pain, emotional pain. And they had a school counselor. But what they meant by school counselor, and I didn't realize this, what they meant by school counselor is like, we're going to help you figure out what kind of job to get, what university to go to. If you want to learn whatever, you want to go to medical school, here's some good universities. If you want to learn engineering or whatever, they're going to help you with vocation or your next steps in your educational journey. School counseling.
Yeah.
I thought it meant emotional counseling. So they said, if you need any help, go to the counselor. Well, they meant, as a junior, senior, you're going to start thinking about college and university or all that stuff. And so you could write a note saying, hey, I need to discuss getting into such and such university or becoming an engineer or something, put a little note in their mailbox or whatever. And I wrote, I'm struggling. I'm hurting. I'm in pain. I never heard a thing from it. And I'm 57. And that was when I was, 16, 17. And I still remember that. I still remember
reach out when
nobody reached out to me when I needed help. And so if that sticks with you some 30-ish years later, that's the one thing I remember just off the top of my head. I'm sure there's others, but it's those things that start piling up.
Yeah.
And you're going to, I guess maybe that's just like, maybe that's what we're supposed to learn while we're here, how to develop, how to grow is to deal with the hurt and pain. But if you don't know how, if nobody's taught you, you said that a little bit ago, what if they told you this in school? What if they told you not only about relationships and how to communicate with your partner, your romantic partner, let alone business partner, let alone, what's a mortgage all about? And how do you buy a car? And what about nutrition? And how do you go shopping? What if they taught you how to live life instead of calculus? And God bless the engineers and all the people that need calculus and are sitting in rockets and landing them on little tripods and things.
I've never used it as an adult.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. And geology and all these things are wonderful, but it's also, I don't know anything about mortgages still. I guess if that's what the title company says and my mortgage person says, I guess that's what we'll do. I don't know.
But even still today, though, I think that some of our education is starting to evolve. Only because of the recognition that there's so many things that are at our fingertips. So like even when I was a kid, right, we didn't have the internet, right? We didn't have cell phones. So rote memorization was something that was real. Like we had to memorize and learn knowledge because we didn't have another way to do it, right? Basic arithmetic and things like that. Whereas today, though the importance of understanding how to do it is strong, we also are surrounded by tools that give us any bit of information we could ever want to know intellectually, right? How to do anything, knowledge that we need to memorize from history. So what's interesting is it's almost like we're more in a place today where we need to be teaching people how to think teaching people how to feel, teaching people how to emotionally regulate, teaching people to executive function, teaching people to communicate, not just in the nature of writing a paper, but again, how to communicate in order to connect with another human being, right? And those things are not taught to us.
Yeah.
And so on top of all this, by the way, I love the memory that you pulled up, because how often does that happen in the times that people work with you where they say, well, every time I've ever reached out to ask for help, like nobody's there.
Yeah.
Right. And it starts to become this self-perpetuating cycle that gets reinforced to a point that people feel abandoned, that there is no hope. Right. So they reach you in a place of hopelessness and helplessness in many cases. Oftentimes, what I also recognize in our work is the complete disconnect people have from not just conscious mind and unconscious mind, but even connection to their body and understanding what and how that can point us towards what's important. Mm-hmm. So we start to protect so much that we disconnect so that we're all just living in our minds. And I don't mean mind, I mean brain and perseverating. When you are working with somebody, one of the things that we have to, at least in the work and how I go about it, work with folks on is we're always getting to the source like you. But oftentimes what we're using is the cellular memory and how it shows up in reaction moments, real time, to basically create new patterns as a result of it and start to understand what is real and to identify the source that created it in the first place. Yeah. Okay. And so there becomes an evolution in the way that we create memory in our body based on how we associate this. I don't have enough knowledge on hypnotherapy specifically to know what are the elements it's addressing beyond reaching the subconscious mind. And when you're in touch with the subconscious mind, I would believe, since the subconscious mind connects to fulfill our conscious mind's desires, typically, and it's an expression of emotion, I would imagine that if you transform that, you transform even the cells associated with it to a degree. But I don't understand. So could you talk a little bit about the science and how hypnotherapy helps heal and readdress not just the subconscious mind's narratives, but also the cellular memory associated within our body. Yeah. So that holistically we're whole. Yeah. Okay. And so I think a lot of hypnotherapy can be, it's a big pot filled with lots of different things, whether it's guided visualization, neuro-linguistic programming, a lot of coaching or mindset work, but it also involves body. Because, a lot of people, this the mind-body connection or the mind-body-spirit connection. And to me, and in general, I think everybody kind of understands that it's all one thing. You are one thing. Yep. And so in terms of the body, we're communicating to ourselves all the time. And of course, this can get into a huge discussion about epigenetics and the information you feed to a cell. But one of the issues with chronic emotional upset, whether it's chronic anger, chronic anxiety, chronic worry, whatever it may be, is that you're constantly feeding your cells new information. The reason you feel like that, if you're feeling that anger, and this is what's extraordinary when I work with people, we focus on body first, the first session or two. And it's like, okay, that anger you were describing in the intake form or on the phone call, if we had a consultation call or something, where do you feel that in the body? A lot of people are just like, oh, right here. Yep. Other people, it might take them a couple of beats because they've never actually tuned into their body. Yeah. And I'm like, all the time you need. And my first session or two is 90 minutes. It may seem like a long time, but when a talk therapy session is like 50 minutes or so, but I want the time. So if they take 2 or 3 minutes to focus in on the body, or it takes, and maybe we'll get into this little bit of how a session might work. But if it's taking them a half an hour to do the healing work, all right, now we got the time. I don't have to be watching, you got to get out of here because time's up. And so by focusing on the body, where do you feel that hurt and that pain, that pressure, that tension, that anger, whatever you define it as, all that negativity, where do you feel it in your body? They may say their chest or their heart or their gut or the back of the neck or their head or wherever. What color is it? Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it big? Is it small? Is it dark? Is it light? What does it look like? And so somebody would say, okay, I'm just feeling all this anger. I'm feeling this pain. Okay, what color is it? It's red.
tell me about it. It's heavy. It's like dark. It feels like just gunk stuck to my heart. All right. And now what you've done, you've disassociated from it. And so as we look at the body, it's like, now I want you to, and I want you to point to it. I don't want you to get in your head. I want you to take your hand so I can see that it's in your chest or your gut, and not for me, but for them, so they can actually point to it with their body. And now take your hand and grab it and pull it out. And so you're using your body. And what's fascinating about this is the mind can't tell the difference between what's real and what's imagined.
Yeah.
And we know this from, I'm sure you, Brian, and people listening, people watching, they've experienced a nightmare maybe at some point in their life, or their kids have, or something. It doesn't matter how ridiculous or how crazy or how stupid the nightmare is. It'd be gigantic cheeseburgers, two hot dog friends are throwing coconuts at you, chasing you down the street. It's stupid. It's not going to happen. And yet your mind can't tell whether that's real or imagined. And since the main task of your unconscious mind is to keep you safe, is to keep you protected, is for survival, then I'll turn on the safety protocols. Shoot first, ask questions later. We'll figure out if that's a real threat or not. And it could be super realistic, like a veteran having a post-traumatic stress disorder kind of dream about being out on the front lines, even though the war was 30 years ago. But in both cases, they're safe, they're comfortable, they're cozy in bed, and yet their mind is thinking they're in danger, and it'll literally change their physiology. Yep. And what's changing is the cellular communication. So not only are you creating the hormones of adrenaline and cortisol, adrenaline, you probably heard crazy stories of grandmothers lifting cars off of babies. That's adrenaline doing that. It's now coursing through the body. The brain creates these molecules called neuropeptides. And probably a lot of people, you, Brian, and a lot of people have heard about these, but these neuropeptides, hundreds of millions are being dumped into your bloodstream. And these molecules send the message of emotion to the cells of your body. So these are literal molecules of fear, molecules of anxiety, molecules of anger, molecules of joy, molecules of love, molecules of happiness. But in terms of a stress response, you're dumping all these into the bloodstream. Now, what's fascinating about this is from creation of those, let's say, anger molecules, those neuropeptides of anger, hundreds of millions dumped in your bloodstream. They find the cells with the right receptors, key in the keyhole kind of thing. And so they open up the cells and give the cell the message of anger. They get metabolized back in the bloodstream. And as the blood flows around, collecting all the other gases and toxins and carbon dioxide and all the other stuff, goes through the lungs, filters out as you exhale, breathe it out. From creation to breathing out is 90 seconds. So that means if you're still angry or anxious or afraid, an hour later, a week later, 50 years later, you have to keep recreating those neuropeptides over and over and over again. And it gets to the point where if you're creating it so often, those neuropeptides may actually break off in the receptor. And so kind of like, if you ever had that experience of breaking the key off in the lock of the door, you're done. You're stuck. What are you going to do? And now not only is this anger, this neuropeptide, this molecule of anger stuck within the cell of your body, or hundreds, if not millions of cells of your body, you've now goofed up the cellular communication of your system. And then you wonder why people get sick or they can't sleep, or they gain weight or lose weight or whatever it may be.
Or live in pain.
And so in terms of the cellular communication, whatever it is you need to do, and I always say, trust your intuition, but whatever you need to do to start cleaning up your system, you can clean it up. You're allowed.
You can.
And whether it's breath work, whether it's therapeutic hypnosis, whether it's acupuncture, whether it's Tai Chi, whether it's a medical doctor, whether it's massage, whether it's yoga, or whatever it may be, tune into your body and listen to what it's telling you to do. And if it's drinking lots of water, drink lots of water. If it's crying 3 times a day, cry 3 times a day. Because the 3 best ways to get rid of those neuropeptides is breath, as we just described, crying, sweating, and urination. All the ways the body releases toxins. And as you start recharging your cells, and again, remember, as we all learned back in biology class, cells have a lifespan that will eventually, be disposed of by the body. I mean, that's what our hair is. That's what our fingernails.
Well, every cell in our body regenerates every 7 years.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, yeah, some within weeks, some within years.
Yep.
So, but by 7 years, you have an entirely new body, which is a head scratcher of like, well, then why is the disease still there 10 years
Because
later?
to your point, you continue perpetuating the pattern and you re-experience all those things until you start to break it down.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, there's so much similarity in such unique ways.
Mm-hmm.
Typically the first 2 or 3 questions often when I'm working with folks as well is the same thing. How does that show up in your body? Now, what's interesting is I like the exercise that you go through with the visualization and the colors and the even removal of it. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'll walk people through in terms of like even transitioning from work into home state is just that physical element of like almost brushing off the armor that they carried at work all day to go in open and soft with their family. Yeah. And you gave the visualization with that. It's so different than the work that I'll do when I'm getting people into their body, but it has the similar outcome. Yes. And that's what I think is at the end of the day is what you also said in there is all of these different modalities. Mm-hmm. By the way, they all work. They just might not all work for you. Exactly. Right. And so it's a matter of staying persistent to find the modalities that allow us to access these things. One of the things that I will say, and I didn't share this with you, I think necessarily before, but I think it's important to acknowledge because it ties to all of this. And then I want to completely flip it and I want to take our conversation in a slightly different direction because I love where we're going with this. But I lived with daily physical pain for nearly 31 years to the point that it was quality of life impacting and debilitating in many ways, to the point that I had a 2 to 3 hour morning routine to get myself moving every day so that I wouldn't just stay in bed. Like this was my reality for years. And my body has had a lot of trauma and there's a lot of injury and there's still a lot of brokenness in my body. All that said, I have now been 18 months with 0 physical pain. Nice. And people have asked me many, 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 many times, bro, what would you do? What'd you do? What'd you do? By the way, I've tried it all. If there's a healing modality out there, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, I've probably tried it. Yeah. Right. And not one of them solved the problem. It was a lot of the combinations of getting to ultimately the pathway that we're talking about, which is creating a new cellular pathway, new pattern recognition, new ways of believing and thinking. But the truth of it was, what got me out of pain was it was the deepest level of healing and the deepest level of congruence I'd ever been in my life. Yeah. And I believe more than anything today that my physical pain, despite the fact that my body is still, by medical definitions, broken, I haven't experienced physical pain. And I believe it was a manifestation of the unpacked, unprocessed emotional pain that I hadn't been able to get to in my vicious attempt to do so over the prior decade. Yeah. Now, can I ask you a question about that?
So would you say that before you did that work, did you see yourself as broken? And then after that, you didn't?
No, I don't. So I actually don't have a mentality of believing that I'm broken or that my body is broke. I believe my body's extremely capable. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying from a medical perspective, I mean, I've got blown out discs at C6 and C7. I don't have a lat on the left side of my back. I don't have a tricep. My bicep is my gracilis. I have a complete different structure. I've got a curve in my spine because of the muscular imbalance. Like, my body from a structural, scientific, medical perspective is by definition broken. I don't view myself as disabled even, though by definition in our world, I am technically a disabled person. Right. And so I use that language only from the elements of the medical piece because it wasn't a medical healing. Right. It wasn't a physical healing. So though my body healed here years ago, no, I don't believe that was correlated, honestly. In this case, though, what is interesting is I know that a lot of my pain was a self-perpetuating cycle as well that was connected to some of the anger, some of the shame, and things within my past that I had blocked out or not been able to access around the physical injury and some of the disconnects that I wasn't able to make those connections until the last probably 5 years. And so the combo of all those things is where I think it led.
So what was the point where you said this ends and I need to do the work?
Oh, I've been doing the work for 25 years.
But something happened 5 years ago, you're saying. What was it that did you just get?
So probably 5 or 6 years ago, it was the recognition, and it was at that point a belief that I would never not live without pain. And my pain had reached a point, it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, I'm trying to remember the timeline, where the amount of pain I had reached and the amount of physical effort I was putting in to offset the pain, as well as spiritual work and therapy and talk, like I was doing a lot of it, but it was ultimately a decision between, do I take narcotics or do I use some alternative style of medicine and healing? Right. And I chose not to go down the narcotics path because I've never liked it. And I also didn't want to commit myself to what that was going to mean. But at that time, there was a belief that was ingrained around, I believed that I needed to be in pain. Mm-hmm. I believed that pain was necessary for anything worthwhile in this life. I had a badge of honor that I would wear that I was a practitioner of pain. Wow. And there was a lot of this belief that was just an accepting of where I was at. There was also lots of transitions that took place in that time between this concept of fighting and surrender, really trying to get into my own body. It was 7 years ago that I realized that when I shut off physical pain, because it exceeded my ability to cope, that I had also shut off mental pain, emotional pain, and spiritual pain for 20 to 25 years. And so I was 32 years old. So 7 years ago. So it was probably 5 to 7 is the window when it started to transition, that I started to realize how much I was unconsciously, but actively suppressing any emotion. I didn't even know I was doing it. Yeah. And so I just would start to slow down and to feel things a little bit more and get more and more and more into my body. And so I think that was the window that started to shift it. But at the time when I started to recognize what might be possible, it wasn't until I was 6 months out of pain that I believed I could live a life without pain. Yeah. Yeah. Because I had lived with it for 31 years and it was my ingrained belief system. Whereas today I have a very evolved, different one as a result of where I'm at this moment. I remember the day before I woke up without pain though. And when I say it was the deepest level of healing and congruence, it was proven to me in the day, not just through me and the way I was living, but through my wife and kids and what was represented in the way that they were showing up in the same environment. And everything clicked and I woke up the next morning and I didn't have pain. But like I said, it was 6 months before I believed it wouldn't come back.
What's extraordinary about your story, and I hope everybody understands this, is it's your intention. If your intention is to heal, you'll find healing.
Yep.
If your intention is to hold on to that pain, you'll hold on to pain no matter the doctors you go to, the chiropractors, the acupuncturists, the hypnotherapists, the coaches, whoever you're going to. If you feel either not deserving to heal or that you need to hold on to that hurt and pain for protection or just as your identity, then it's not going away.
Correct.
And that's what's extraordinary about this work as therapeutic, with therapeutic hypnosis, or the kind of work you do, Brian, and some of this other stuff, with Neuro-Linguistic Programming and all this kind of stuff. I'm not here to fix anybody. Yeah. You can fix yourself, but I can't make you do it. You go to a surgeon to have your appendix out. Yeah, they're going to fix you. You go to a massage therapist, they're going to help you out. Yep. But with this, it's your intention. I can't make anybody stop smoking. I just can't go into a bar or a casino in Vegas and just snappy, wavy my hand and everybody stops smoking. I can't go into prisons and hypnotize everybody to be upstanding law-abiding citizens. I can't get Elon Musk to write me $1 billion check. And the reason why is I can't make anybody do anything they don't want to do. Yep. And so if the intention maybe as some sort of self-protection, self-preservation, or maybe just this is who I am, if you're unwilling to let go of that hurt and pain, it's going to manifest possibly even more seriously into physical pain and physical illness, because there's that long conversation about epigenetics and going.
It's all connected. I mean, everything we're talking about is connected in ways, right? It's just the truth. But what you're saying is also real, because not only is that relevant for hypnotherapy, because again, you can't hypnotize somebody to do something they don't want to do. Yeah. Right. And to your point, though, in many situations, like I was unconscious to the fact that I had believed and had been wearing this badge of honor as a practitioner of pain. Yeah. Right. It was not something that I was conscious to at that time. Yeah. And so though I didn't want to live with pain, I didn't understand what was blocking my ability to get down, or at least on the right pathways to get myself to where I am today. Yeah. And that's, I think, what I often talk about in the same light, although it's different work, is people ask me, who's an ideal client for you? And I always bring it back to, if somebody doesn't have the interest, desire, or courage to find and stand in their truth, they're not ready to be in my world.
Yeah.
Because it is something that you have to desire, you have to want, and it's not always an easy journey to get there. What I'm hearing from you as well, though, and I think that this maybe debunks some of the belief systems around hypnotherapy, and I could be wrong. I might be putting pieces together here, but as I listen to you, you talk about multiple sessions and the intent and what it builds into and all the different modalities that are in here. And I think that there's sometimes this belief that it's like, oh, hypnotherapy, we're going to wave a watch swinging in front of your face and we're going to snap our fingers and you're going to be transformed in the moment.
Yeah.
And though I think there's elements of that are true, right? I think similar to the work that I do, we can help someone experience and feel something in a moment. Mm-hmm. But again, it's the ingrained deep patterns behind it that until we remove those and create new pathways, it's going to continue to show up.
Yeah.
And so could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the biggest myths that might take place in your work? And what does it look like if someone comes to you to, like, what period of time are you going to be working with them on average over? How many types of sessions, and then specifically, how does hypnotherapy show up in that process?
Okay. All great questions. What I generally tell people is expect 3, 4, maybe 5 sessions.
Okay.
Now I say that in maybe we do 1, maybe we do 2, maybe we do 8, but we're not going to be doing 80, 90 sessions over 2 years. Now, it's always wonderful to see one and done kind of sessions. It's miraculous. It's wonderful. But sometimes there's setup to change.
Yeah.
Change, in my humble estimation, change happens in an instant. I'm sure you've seen that in your life. Just what you were just literally talking about.
Yeah.
Change happens in an instant. There might be some lead up of years to finally say, yes, it changes now.
Yep.
But between the lead up and the setup, change happens. You're either a smoker or you're a non-smoker.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so in terms of this work, it's really about finding the root issue. And it may happen pretty quickly, or maybe, I work with people. In first session, we do a lot of healing work. And it's like, oh, it's this anxiety and the stress and anger I've been carrying around with me. And, it's just, I don't get along with my mom and or my dad. And, I had some trouble in school and things like that. I'm like, okay, well, let's work on that. Let's start dropping the armor and all this. And then the second session is like, it's just when I was raped when I was 7, I think it was really is when the hurt. I'm like, what? What did you just say? Where did that come from? And it is like a punch to the gut. I was like, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I had no idea. But they're feeling more comfortable. They're feeling like there's some rapport. Maybe it's the first time they've talked about it in a really long time,
or ever.
And they just drop it like it's, oh, you already knew this. And that's what's extraordinary about you. When you're ready to heal, you will heal.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean there won't be, especially if there's a physical issue, physical therapy or yoga classes, and there's a certain relentlessness to this work. But in terms of the change work, again, it's about the intention. And if your intention is to heal, then we can start the process. Now, you're talking about misconceptions, and I think a big one, is the pocket watch or the little medallion or whatever. And the Las Vegas shows and things like this. And it's really unfortunate because I think it prevents a lot of people from even looking into it, because I don't want to be controlled. I don't want to bark like a dog and quack like a duck and all that. And it's so extraordinarily frustrating because it's not about taking control from anybody. It's about giving back control. Yeah. In fact, there's a great hypnotherapist who studies this at Stanford, Dr. David Spiegel. And he says, literally has quotes where he's just like, it's about giving back control to the person. Again, I can't take any control from anybody, but maybe somebody's seen a Las Vegas show. Maybe they've gone to a comedy club and they're funny and they're entertaining. Every single person who gets up on that stage volunteered to be there. Yeah. They wanted. Not only did they buy a ticket to the show, they sat down in their seat. Hypnotist comes out, hey, everybody, let's have a fun time. And who wants to get up on stage and really enjoy themselves and have a good time? bunch of people raise their hand. Of course, who's this hypnotist going to choose? The people who are super excited and waving their hand, me.
Yeah.
Not the half or the people, oh, pick him. No, they're going to pick the people who are super excited to be up there. They're going to bring them up on stage, and they're even going to do some testing to make sure they're a good candidate, because sometimes you don't think it through. It's like, oh, I want to do that. It looks like fun. And then you got 200 people staring at you. You're under some bright lights and some cameras, and you start getting really nervous. And so that's not going to be a good candidate for the show. Or, maybe you're there to try to trick the hypnotist like a heckler in a comedy club. So they're going to do some processes like, everybody put your hands together in the prayer position and now pretend they're super glued together and pull your hands, or just try to pull your hands apart. And everybody's like, and then that one person is going to go, boink, you're off the stage. You're not going to be a good candidate for the show because that's what that person's there to do, to entertain. So what we talked about before is intention. Everybody's intention up on the stage is to entertain. They're extroverts. They're exhibitionists. They want to have fun.
Yeah.
And so what are they going to do? They have fun. So they dance like Michael Jackson, and they sing like Elvis Presley, and they quack like a duck, and they pretend they're on a roller coaster or whatever the gag is. They do that because they want to, assuming that it's not the local improv troupe that got planted in the audience, or they're faking it because they're embarrassed that they're not in some sort of hypnosis trance and they're just pretending. But they're doing it because they want to.
Yeah.
So that becomes really empowering, because what if you want to heal? And so the greatest misconception, I think, is that we somehow take control away from people. And it's the exact opposite. We actually give back control. And what Dr. Irving Kirsch has said is this is non-deceptive placebo. And of course, we all heard about the placebo effect back in school. Every single research study, that like a pharmaceutical research study, something like that, has to have the placebo. Half the group is going to be taking a sugar pill. Let's say they're doing research on high blood pressure medication. Mm-hmm. Half the group's going to get a sugar pill. Why? Because they know mind will heal the body. And so they have to account for that literally in their research. There was Dr. Irving Kirsch did a lot of books in the early 2000s on Prozac and a lot of the SSRI drugs. And he got a bunch of information from the Freedom of Information Act, because some of that Prozac or SSRI drug research was funded by the National Institutes of Health, government institute. And so they own that research. Now, you don't have to publish your research.
Yep.
There's no law in the world that says you have to publish your research. But if it's owned by the government, you have to give it to the government. And so Dr. Irving Kirsch, in researching Prozac and these other kind of drugs around depression, got a Freedom of Information Act. And one of the studies showed that 90% of the placebo group got better from chronic depression. And I'm not talking Monday morning blues or your football team lost or your favorite TV show got canceled. I'm talking chronic depression of years. 90% healed themselves through trickery, through pretending, taking a little blue pill. And what's interesting, you know this, that the color of pills has to do with not just randomly choosing colors, but it has to do with what the pill is for. So like blue pills are always tranquilizers, because blue is calming, except for men in Italy. And they think the reason why blue tranquilizers don't work on men in Italy is because one of the football teams, one of the soccer teams here in America, as you'd call it, is the azure, which is blue in Italian. And of course, their uniforms are blue. And so one theory is that blue to Italian men gets them excited or irate even. And so blue tranquilizers don't work on Italian men, but works on everybody else in the world.
Yeah.
And, yellow means this and green is that for that. And they do that because you're healing yourself. Imagine what if it was just a blue, sugar pill or something. It's like, oh, it's a tranquilizer. So you take, and so what's interesting about that kind of research, let's say high blood pressure medication, half the people are getting the sugar pill, 30% in the placebo group get better. Well, the people on the real medication, 40% get better. They now have to subtract 30% because maybe they got better through mind alone too. So really only 10% got better, and that's good enough. We'll put it on the market at $50 a pill. Well, nobody really was like, but 30% got better through healing themselves because there's no like $1 billion return on it.
Yep.
I'm not getting super rich. I don't have my private jet or my yacht because I'm taking 2, 3, 4 sessions to teach somebody how to heal themselves. And what's fascinating about this, this is a good time to even talk about this, is the kind of origin of a lot of this work comes from the late 1800s. And Sigmund Freud was a hypnotherapist. And there's 2 schools of hypnotherapy in Vienna. He was at one of them. And the issue with Dr. Freud was that he had a speech impediment.
Yep.
And in terms of therapeutic hypnosis, the hypnotherapist talks less. So not only are you reading the person, maybe getting a little more in depth on what they want to work on, there's inductions, there's deepenings, there's visualization work, there's suggestions, there are new instructions, there's maybe some healing work around the hurt and the pain, and then there's the closeout and the count out and all this stuff, and then the goodbyes. So you could be talking literally for an hour, 10 minutes. If you have a speech impediment, that's not going to go very well. And he was also a little bit annoyed that a person would walk into a hypnotherapist's office with a problem and walk out without the problem. And what he wanted to do was dive into the darkness, dive into the shadow, dive into the hurt and pain and find out more about it, stir the pot and discuss it and see what are aspects and what tentacles maybe reaches into other parts of life and really get into depth with it. He basically created analytical psychology. He literally called it talk therapy as somebody with speech impediment. If you've ever seen maybe pictures or drawings, the person would lie down on the couch and he would sit behind them. Talk therapy, he's not talking. The other person's talking. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. I'm writing notes. Tell me more about that. He said about this new therapy he was developing that it was not a poor man's therapy because it was going to take hundreds and hundreds of hours. And so when you see the basis of what a lot of and this is not to disparage talk therapy. I think it's an extraordinary, helpful, and healing modality. But in terms of how it could be maybe misused in that you're going to spend hundreds and hundreds of hours talking about something that may not be the problem because it's in the unconscious. And while he's developing this theory of analytical psychology, he's high on cocaine. He's a cocaine addict. And you can go to his office in Vienna to take a tour of Sigmund Freud's office, not like on here in Scottsdale, Arizona. You can take a tour of Milton Erickson's home and see his office. But you can go to Vienna and see Sigmund Freud's office, and there's still vials of pharmaceutical cocaine on his shelving. It's like, this is extraordinary.
But to your point as well, this is why people can sometimes go to talk therapy for decades and still be talking about the same things. Right? It's why there's some shock and awe sometimes when people come into my world and they're like, I've been going to therapy for 10, 15 years and you helped me in 2 sessions or 1 session or in 10 minutes, right? Like it's really interesting because it doesn't always get to the source and there can be this repeat element. There's also some truth to the fact that there is some level of business model that's supported by having regular visits coming back by the same patients, right? Chiropractic offices, many of them, right? It's come back and if it's proactive maintenance, it's right. And there's this same dynamic, I think sometimes it happens in talk therapy. I also think what's interesting with talk therapy is that like the dynamic of talking is also about connecting around human experiences and vulnerabilities that there is joint in. And yet there's lots of restrictions for therapists to even share anything about themselves if that's really the dynamic is conversation. And so it doesn't always like get people to where they need to be. And same thing with coaches. So this is in my intensive work, I will not work with somebody beyond a year. Because my goal is not to build a business model where I have a bunch of people dependent on me. It's to elevate and empower them to go do this on their own. Right. And so it's a totally different viewpoint. And so, you talk about some of the gamification, some of the magic, some of the laughter and the show business elements that go into this piece, right? You talk about some of the science and where this comes from, but through the lens of hypnotherapy, right? If somebody wants to come in and be hypnotized in a session, right? And I realize I'm making it a little bit more dramatized than is probably really the case. What does the process of walking someone into a hypnotized state actually look like? What do you do? What are the critical components? How do you open them to it? And then if there's any specific practices or exercises, what does that look like? I'm fascinated.
There's this, I think from movies, maybe, and TV shows, maybe even the Las Vegas shows, there's this idea that there's some sort of voodoo zombified state that you need to get in. We move in and out of a hypnosis-like state every day, all day long. And people probably experienced, maybe even back in high school, whether maybe it's math class or whatever the class was, and you're taking notes because it's important, it's going to be on the final exam. And then you just start thinking, the weekend's coming up, I'm going to hang out with my friend. You just turned off.
Yeah. Or like world. Driving an autopilot, right?
Yeah.
It's like the perfect example. Yeah.
The perfect example. You just mentioned it. Yeah, you're driving home. It's usually driving home because you've probably lived there for several years, 365 days a year. You've driven home thousands of times. So about 8-9 blocks before your house, you're like, oh boy, I got that meeting tomorrow. I got to get the PowerPoint together, or I got people coming over this weekend. Oh boy, I got to get the house together and I got to get that project done. And all of a sudden you're in your driveway. You've just put yourself in what's the fancy term is hypnagogic trance state. Basically, you've slowed down how fast your brain cells are firing. You've heard about the famous brain wave states back in school, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Beta being consciousness, firing about 18 cycles per second. You just move down to alpha. People remember Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That teacher put everybody in a hypnagogic trance state because he's boring. And that's the whole thing with the watch and talking slowly. You're boring people into it. There's a thing where you can shock people into it and sleep and shout at people and pull them and mess up with their equilibrium so they kind of shock themselves into it. Fine. But how much nicer is it just to sit back in a nice recliner or comfortable chair and just close your eyes? It could be just, you know what? I want you to focus on that spot on the wall and just look at the pattern in the drywall. And when you're ready to do this deep healing work, when your unconscious mind is ready to do deeper healing work, just close your eyes. You may close them right away. It may take a minute, but it's allowing them to decide when they are ready. But it's also the command of, not so much command, but kind of Ericksonian, Milton Erickson kind of language of, I don't know if you're going to go into hypnosis now, slowly or quickly. But when your unconscious mind, and there's also that language of your unconscious. Oh, yeah, I guess, yeah. You know, it's about language. It's about allowing the body to safely and gently move into a more relaxed state. It's not like anything you aren't doing already. Watching TV puts you in the alpha brainwave state. So and what a great example of this, because people come and say, oh, I can't be hypnotized. Or I tried it before and it didn't work. It's like, well, it's because the people you're working with stink. Yeah. They're not good at what they do, because everybody can go into hypnosis trance state. Yeah. You do it every day. So if they can't work with you to do that, that means they're terrible at their job. And so it may just be, I just want you to close your eyes really quickly. In fact, we're not even going to do hypnosis. That's going to take too long. Just close your eyes and take a deep breath in and relax. I want you to focus on your body, top of your head, the tips of your toes. I want you to notice you're talking earlier about that anxiety you were experiencing in the past. And this language of like, you were experiencing in the past. You've now just entered in the suggestion that like, oh yeah, I don't have that anymore. Yeah. Within your unconscious mind. And I'm exaggerating a bit, but this is pure Ericksonian kind of allowing them through language to, yeah, I want to do that. Yeah. They're not there because they don't want to be there. Mm-hmm. They're there to help, to heal. Mm-hmm. And you're there to help them. Now, having said that, there have been people who come to a hypnotherapist to negotiate smoking so they can negotiate with their spouse to smoke in the garage. they don't want to quit smoking. Their wife, their husband wants them to quit smoking. Not only is
so they're not going to
gross
change
and dirty and a bunch of money, but they want to smoke. And so they can say, oh, I tried everything, including hypnotherapy, and I can't stop. So I guess I'm smoking in the garage. You know, the intention, well, is to smoke. So they're not stopping.
Yeah.
And so if your intention is to heal, and that's why you've set up the appointment, and you provide a safe environment for them to do that, even if it's in their own home, because this works over Zoom. I'm not, you know, it's not chiropractic, it's not massage, it's not surgery. So you can do this in the comfort of your own home. And what a wonderful thing to do, because even the research shows that Zoom sessions, whether it's talk therapy or therapeutic hypnosis, what you're doing, the coaching work and mindset work that you do, a doctor's appointment, works as well as, and some research even shows it works better than in person. And while it's fun, like you said at the very beginning, it's fun to connect and be in person. God, you know, how nice it is. Because I've texted you, I was coming over, said, oh, I'm nervous about the traffic this Friday afternoon. And I hit some coming in here and I was like, okay, guess why I want to leave early. It's like, you don't have that anxiousness about, oh, I hope this, you know, Friday traffic is not going to get me, you know, late. I don't want to be late, be that guy. And so with a Zoom session, not only, and, you know, unfortunately I named my business Arizona Integrative Hypnotherapy. And so, because I thought I was working in Flagstaff and Phoenix. And now after kind of COVID, nobody thought in the hypnosis world, I think, to do Zoom, talk therapy or anything. And now we have BetterHelp and all these different organizations to do counseling and coaching and or therapeutic hypnosis online. And what the research shows, it may actually work better than in person, because you feel safe in your home. You feel relaxed in your home. You feel comfortable there. And so by doing that, relaxing and moving into a restful state, even if it's just this, well, just close your eyes and breathe slowly and gently 3 or 4 times. And if you get them to do those big belly breaths, now you're activating the vagus nerve, the big part of that parasympathetic nerve system. So it's not difficult to get somebody to a hypnosis state, especially if they want to. They're coming to hypnosis knowing that, oh, I guess I'm going to do hypnosis. That's half it right there. You know, just going up to somebody in the street and shouting at them, sleep, you know, you're going to like call the cops.
But I think what you're talking about as well, I mean, here's the reality. Like, I'm not a hypnotherapist, but I often get people into hypnotic states.
Oh yeah. I would suggest that a lot of what you do is the same kind of technique.
I would kind of state, with a slightly different delivery model, like different language in some cases, but so much of the same thing. And so I love listening to that, because again, I believe we can put ourselves into a hypnotic state. We can guide ourselves through those processes, right? Like, and so I really appreciate just even the way that you talk about it. I have to ask a really specific question for me before I want to take some more history lesson with you and kind of your story. What's funny is there was one thing that I could consciously sit here and tell you that I want to change and evolve.
Okay.
And it's not happening at the ease that I believed it could or might have the opportunity to. Okay. And one of them, and I'll speak very specifically to it, I believe in the power of tears for all the reasons that you say, right? I also believe that men crying is a sign of strength, right? Like this is what I believe at my cellular level in terms of my intellectual belief, what I have framed and what I choose and believe in the world. I learned by virtue of my situation, not just the injury, but factors that surrounded it. Sure. I learned a long time ago to shut off tears.
Okay.
To the point that my kids have maybe only ever seen me cry once or twice in the 10 years they've been alive. My wife has seen it more than that. She's probably seen it more than anyone else. It has to be so extreme, so intense of a feeling before tears manifest for me. To the point of intent, I intend and desire to cry.
Yeah.
There are times that I've literally said to her, to my consciousness coach, to my other coaches, to people that I'm like, I just want to cry. I know the release that it would provide for me. I know what chemicals it produces. I know the healing modalities of it. And yet tears often don't manifest. Is this something, one, that hypnotherapy could help me with? And two, what would that process look like?
Yeah. It could be as simple. Well, first off, just for a little more information, your children, boys or girls?
Boy first, girl second.
Okay. I just wondered, just because I was wondering if there's a house of female energy or if there's a boy involved, but it's also that even unconscious, why I got to look strong in front of my kids. I got to be the man of the house. And we've learned from movies and even if it's a Dwayne Johnson or movie or I don't know, whatever, all these fight scenes. You ever been punched in the face? I mean, that hurts. But we see these fight scenes and it's just like, just pick themselves up. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. But we're almost being taught through fictionalized scenarios on what it is to be a man.
Yep.
And the shame involved in puncturing that manliness by crying, even though that is literally how the body, the physiology, the neurology is releasing and letting go through tears. Even if you could prove it biologically, there's something that we've been taught. Maybe it's different nowadays, but at least, probably you and I growing up to a certain, level of age and maybe in your 30s, 40s, 50s. And
I'm 39 just for perspective. So
there's a certain point it's like, you're not going to want to do that because that is more of that feminine side of releasing and letting go. But in terms of if you and I were working together and it felt safe, you were telling me there's a block to feeling. I would start again with the body. Where do you feel that in your body? And it may be something to the effect of, I want you to pretend that it's a big black balloon that's blocking your ability to feel emotion and tears. I want you to take a pen and pop it and see what happens, or just, pretending a beautiful waterfall is washing away all the gunk and the junk that's blocking you. But even in my own work, this just happened to me the other day. I was working with somebody and he had come see me back in May. He lives several 100 miles away, and they've come through Flagstaff to visit family outside of town. And so they said, "Oh, we're coming to Flagstaff. We want to do appointments." And I work at the wellness clinic where they have massage and things. So they're doing the whole thing. And he didn't fill out his intake form and he wasn't really responding to emails or anything. Older guy. I don't think he does that kind of stuff. So I really didn't know what he wanted or what he wanted to work on. And when he got there, it felt stiff. But we had a great session and we did a lot of visualization work and things like that. And I didn't feel the whole pull it out of you was his deal, his style. I just wasn't getting that vibe. And so that was several months ago. We came back the other day. They're going through town to visit family. And they decided to do it again. This time, I was thinking about it. I'm like, I'm going to do it this time. No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm going to do it. And then I saw him and it just felt like he was one of those stoic men of an older age in his 60s, maybe heading towards 70. I'm just like, I don't know if he's going to want to do that. I don't know if he's going to want to release. And then I decided I'm going to do it. I just followed my intuition in terms of what he was saying. I'm like, okay, that hurt and pain, that anger, I forget what it was, anxiety or something. I want you to feel it in your body. And I want you to start pulling it out. Just pull it out and pull it out and keep pulling it and pulling it. And the tears came. Because he just, one, maybe it wasn't appropriate that first time because we didn't have rapport and it's new and it's different. But he knew this time, maybe it was the right time to let it go. And this is a safe environment and all that. And it's just extraordinary when you're given permission. Again, I'm not fixing this guy, not fixing anybody, not telling them how to heal. But when you're put in a safe place,
I couldn't agree more.
You are allowed to do it. And maybe even it was helpful that I was a man doing this and telling him that it's okay to do it.
Yep.
If it was a female, maybe it would have worked. He would have closed up and put up the walls and put on the army. But because of it's me and we'd worked together before, and this time it's like, you know what? That hurt and pain that you've been holding on to, that black gunk you feel in your chest, pull it out. And what's extraordinary about this, and again, why sometimes the first sessions are longer, people will pull for a really long time. It's not just like 2 minutes of pull.
Oh, no.
Like, several woman, I asked her, how long have you been dealing with this anxiety? She said, since I was 19. She did not offer what happened at 19. I did not ask. Yep. Not my business. If she wanted to let me know, she can let me know, but that's not what this session is about. So get into stage, just breathe and, relax. I'm going to count down and just listen to the numbers fade away, this kind of thing. And I said, okay, now that anxiety you were just talking about, where do you feel it? I said, I feel it in my head. It's all in my head. I was like, okay, what color is it? It's red. Heavy light, all this stuff. It was just a heavy red. I'm like, okay, I'll pull it out. She starts pulling out. 48 minutes.
Oh, wow.
48 minutes. She pulled and pulled and pulled. And I'm encouraging.
Yeah.
And it's just be silent for a minute and watch it on the clock and see how long that is. 48 minutes. Like, you're doing it perfectly. Keep going. As you reveal it, you heal it. Keep going. As it comes up, it comes out. As you feel it, you reveal it. As you reveal it, you heal it. I was just encouraging and keep going and pulling. 48 minutes. If I just, even in this hypnosis state, she pulls, and then I'm done. It's over. Okay. Why don't you just close your eyes again? We're going to do a wrap up in part 2. And that's, there's an emptiness, there's a void. What science class tells us, nature pours a vacuum. Well, what do you want instead? What happiness you want? Joy? What color is that? Now fill your mind up with that color of the image of, and so finish that. So it's like, again, it's not that I'm fixing anyone. It's
you're guiding them. You're guiding them.
If it takes 10 minutes, it takes 10 minutes. And I'll tell people when they're pulling, it's like, I've had people pull for 20 minutes before. Because I think if you tell them I've had people pull for 48, that sounds insane. It sounds ridiculous. But, when you're dealing with potentially 50 years of wounds and hurt and pain and that heaviness, and you realizing that you're related. So I'm sure a lot of people have maybe gone backpacking. Maybe they're into Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or just family stuff or whatever, friends. And you're hiking and you got this 25-pound pack on. And after a while, it's just like, it's not comfortable. It's going to be miserable, but it's like you're getting used to it. It's familiar. And after about 6 hours, it's just the way it is. It's who you are. And then you get to where you're going to camp in this beautiful spot and you just unbuckle it. You take it off. You're like, that wasn't who I was. Do you need to know what's in the backpack? Did you need to go, I got pots and pans. I got my extra clothes. No, just take off the backpack. And sometimes that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
It's that Sigmund Freud thing. It was like, well, do you need to analyze it? Well, why did I bring this cast iron skillet? No, just take off the backpack.
Yeah. I appreciate how you navigate the situations and the variety and the differences in people. I think going back to where I was at with my question on it, one thing I do want to acknowledge and say is you're right on all of the, what I'm going to call toxic masculinity conditioning that takes place. It's something I've actively spent time speaking with my kids about in the fact that I shut it off. And I know that I shut it off years ago.
And it's very vulnerable of you to do that.
So again, I think just given the nature of what we do, I wanted to clarify that I not because I feel the need to defend it, but to suggest that I'm actually trying to normalize opportunity, not have them believe that because daddy doesn't cry, that they shouldn't cry. Right. We talk very openly around it. And so I would be fascinated to try to explore this myself, because again, for me, we talk so openly in the household, and I am extremely vulnerable and real with my kids because I do believe, and to your whole point on permission, I believe that we suffer in 4 areas. It's the things that are left unsaid, the things that we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or understand, or the things that are left undone. Yeah. And so every time I speak about it, not only is it acting and doing and alleviating my own struggles around it, getting me closer and closer and closer to my ability to access tears, but on any topic, right? I'm also giving permission to feel and say to the people that are listening, and words to articulate and understand it in a way that they may not have without me. Yeah. Right. And so to me, it's about the normalization of these topics in conversation that I think also can create a lot of freedom for people. Not, again, because we need to sit and dissect everything, right? But we do need to understand it enough to be able to point the light at it. Yeah. One of the things that I noticed, which is interesting in the examples that you give around what hypnotherapy can look like, and not just in the stage and presence and entertainment side of it, your voice changes slightly. Yeah. It's very nuanced. It's almost like it gets more rounded at the beginning and ends of each word. It's like this gentleness that goes, and there's not that you have an edge otherwise, but there's a more apparent intensity, for lack of a better term, in your normal speaking voice to when you go into that kind of more, I'm guiding someone voice. Yeah. You seem to be aware that this is the case, almost as to the point that's intentional. But could you describe that? Like, what is the difference between the two? And when do you determine it appropriate to transition your voice to one versus the other?
That's really interesting, because I do notice that, and I don't know particularly, I think it's just modeling the masters. You do trainings, you do courses, or, you see old films of Milton Erickson or some of the older masters. And it's more like copying other people. There's Roy Hill. That's Roy Hill. He's the film director. Roy Wood was a great hypnotherapist. He's probably in his 80s now. And I did a workshop with him at a conference. And he's old school. And he's one of the great masters, one of the last you could work with. Oh, this guy was back in the 60s and 70s. He probably knew, hanging out with Milton Erickson and all those, Dave Eldman and all those wonderful people. And one thing I noticed about him, he would do something when he was doing a demonstration, and okay, everybody, let's do this process together. And he'd do something like, and now I want you to go deeper and deeper. And I'm exaggerating a bit, but it's like he's dropping by octaves the voice. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense, because you're actually using the tonality of your voice to help them drop down to the basement. It's sort of like, take the staircase from the first floor down to the basement. The basement means something. It's not from the 5th floor to the 4th floor. It's the first floor to the basement, or the escalator down to the basement, or whatever. And so it's just listening to other people. I mean, that's how the whole Neuro-Linguistic Programming thing came about with Richard Bandler and John Grinder back in the early 70s. Richard Bandler, I forget who was who, but Richard Bandler, John Grinder, one was a mathematician, the other was a linguist. And they were fascinated by the work of Milton Erickson and Virginia Satir and Fritz and Laura Perls, that came up with Gestalt therapy. And these therapists who were using language to help people heal. And again, it's that Milton Erickson thing of, well, I don't know how you are going to find healing and transformation now. And I'm exaggerating with the pauses and things, but it's that direction, even with the eyes open in a crowded restaurant or a crowded airport, you can do this work. I don't know how you're going to find a way to heal now. And the subconscious mind, oh yeah, I guess I will find a way to heal now. And then it does it. And so they're fascinated by this, and they started studying tonality. They started studying pacing. They started studying volume and words. And they came up with this, a literal analytical system, which they dubbed Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP. Mm-hmm. Tony Robbins, all know who Tony Robbins is. He's made his name by bringing NLP to the masses. You read those early books by Bandler and Grinder, some of the others who also started looking into that research. They're academic books. It's difficult. It's dry. But, Tony Robbins and Will Horton and some of these other people who are coming up in the 80s saw this and said, oh my God, you can use language to help people. It's already happening. Obviously commercials, obviously politicians, obviously the news. But we can use it to help focus healing and change and transformation, not only to quit smoking, but phobias. I mean, Tony Robbins made his name by going on morning shows, the Morning Zoo or the primetime shows, and getting people to drop their fear of snakes on live TV. Yep. And they'd have the zoo person there with a bunch of snakes, and at the end, they're all just covered in snakes, and isn't it? Oh, they're fun. And so he would, but just using language. Now, the problem with NLP, what became of it is like the used car salesman took a hold of it, and the dating scene and how to seduce women kind of thing. And, unfortunate thing about Neuro-Linguistic Programming, it's not unfortunate, but with Neuro-Linguistic Programming, it's sort of like the Force from Star Wars. It's neither good or bad. It's just,
it's the intent behind it.
It's the intent behind it. Do you want to be the Empire? Or you want to be the
using it for good or using it for damage?
And
totally.
so, you can use this for healing. So in terms of you're talking about voice, I do notice that, and I don't know if there's a specific thought process through me doing it. It just seems to work when you elongate it. Just go deeper down into hypnosis. And I'm going to count 5. And part of it's the boring thing. Let's bore them just like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Let's bore them into being relaxed and calm, just like back in high school math class. And so 5, 4. But it can also get very exciting.
Yeah.
I want you to pull. I want you to pull. I want you to pull. And help them just pull. Come on, I guess. I don't know. No, pull. You can do it. You're doing it perfectly. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
What I appreciate is also, though, the real-time representation of the fact that though you are aware of it, you're unconscious to where and how it develops in the moment, which goes to suggest that it's also not just learning to trust your intuition, but also the significant amount of study and modeling that you were exposed to that allows you to have access to these tools so that when you do put yourself in that state of surrender yourself, it can flow through. Yeah. But to the whole point of even what we're talking about and making the unconscious conscious, it's like you're conscious to the fact that happens. You're unconscious to the fact as to why or what drives it, even though you can understand the science behind why it was done from the people that model it. It also brings to light the truth, which is one of the facts that I talk to people about as well, is that only 7% of our communication is in the words that we use.
Right. Yeah.
38% is delivery, tone, and cadence.
Yeah.
55% is the nonverbals.
Yeah.
Right. And so even your ability to understand modeling and reflections, and there's so many elements that they teach here, but what you're doing in a lot of cases is you're putting yourself into a state that also facilitates a safer environment because of either how the words are accessed or the state that it puts them into.
Right.
And so you're trusting based on what you see in front of you. What are the tools? What are the tones? What are the cadences that I need to operate in to be able to get people to their desired state? And I really appreciate that. One of the things that, we started with in this whole conversation was that who you are is a byproduct of realizing that one day you had to wake up when your son when you were getting ready to become a father, and the things that you realized you needed to fix, improve, and break the cycles of for yourself.
Right.
You talked about deep levels of depression in your family history, right? And sometimes those things are truly genetic, and they've shown that trauma gets passed down through the DNA.
Yeah.
Right. So there's all of these tendencies and conditioning that go into it. You've shared some of your early childhood stuff that were moments that you weren't believed or weren't seen. How long was the transition for you from the moment you decided you wanted to break these patterns and fix yourself to the time that you felt like you had accomplished that?
I would say that took a couple of years. Now, it wasn't a couple of years of constant work. It was on and off, and it was a lot of experimentation. It was a lot of trying different things, and it wasn't consistent at all. And it was all kind of DIY kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a coach. I wasn't doing talk therapy with anybody. I didn't have anybody shining a flashlight. It was a lot of trial and error of what worked for me. It was a lot of reading Tony Robbins or, just whatever it was. And then maybe it might be a month of not working on it because of work or because of a new baby or because of whatever is going on in life. And so it wasn't consistent, but it was over time, just like working on myself and finding this technique. But I think what really helped and why I eventually moved in the direction of even wanting to become a hypnotherapist is because of the work I did with hypnotherapy. That was probably the thing that jumpstarted me. And again, that's not for everybody. You use what you need to use and follow your intuition.
But what was your experience with it?
My experience with it was not exactly the pulling out kind of stuff, because I think might be a relatively maybe not new, but in terms of just learning and experimenting and putting all sorts of different things together, that kind of more neuro-linguistic programming on top of the physical healing and breath work and all these things, start putting it together. But in terms of just quieting down and doing the visualization techniques of, and it could be, I want you to go into a beautiful, comfortable, friendly home. And there's all sorts of cabinets and drawers. I want you to start looking at cabinets and the drawers and what is it you're looking for? What are you trying to find? In fact, there's a secret door behind the bookcase. Open the bookcase, pull out a secret door, and the answer will be there. That kind of thing. And it was more maybe, I don't know what people may think of traditional hypnotherapy, visualization work, as opposed to the pulling out and things that are adding, other elements like neuro-linguistic programming or breath work, things like that. But it was more of turning a light on in the darkness, I guess it would say, and releasing the hurt and pain I felt, on top of things like exercise.
Yeah.
There's got to be hundreds upon hundreds of studies that show that exercise will cure, not just help a little bit, but cure chronic depression, as well as medication might. Exercise.
Yep.
Of course, if you're depressed, you don't want to get out of bed. But if you can exercise and start eating right, and it's a lot of these different things that, of course, it takes a little bit for the exercise to start doing its business and getting all the toxins from maybe the processed foods you're eating and quitting the alcohol and too much coffee and all that stuff. But as you start feeling better, and then maybe doing the deeper work, it's all of a sudden you wake up one morning, you're like, I don't feel like heaviness anymore. And I haven't for a long time.
So what was the darkness and the pain specifically that you started your process in hypnotherapy wanting to remove?
It really came down to the alcoholism growing up in my house. This is getting really deep and maybe unnecessary, but it was just...
We like deep on this show, by the way. We talked very little about the deep stuff with you, but if you listen to some of these episodes, man, we get real deep.
I don't think my parents were happy together. I think it was a marriage of convenience. My mother lost her first husband to cancer at the age of 18. And if you're kind of doing the math in your head, you probably realize this is late 1950s, early 1960s. And grew up in rural Idaho, Paul, Idaho. In the 70s, it was a town of 500. So I can't imagine what it was in the 50s when she was growing up. And she had moved to San Diego with her husband, 18-year-old husband. And he got diagnosed with cancer. And a year later, it was all over. And she moved back home, and there wasn't a lot of support there. So she moved back and working in an office with where my dad was. And I don't think he was a Navy guy, and he had been moving around. So he didn't have the ability to form long-term relationships because you're moving all the time. And he had gone out of the Navy and was working for the Navy, but in a private sector. And I just think there are two lonely people who found each other, and 15 years later found they really actually didn't have much in common. And what do you do to hide the pain? Mm-hmm. And this is back in the 70s, early 80s. I don't think a lot was known. I mean, we have the classic, extraordinarily unfortunate stories of like Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, or Sid Barrett of Pink Floyd, Keith Moon of The Who, if they had gotten the help they needed, but you didn't know. You didn't say, just snap out of it. What are you acting like this? Just get it together.
Well, it wasn't really talked about a lot back then.
It was not about or understood. And, back in the day, you just, I guess you go to the Institute. You don't want your family and your friends to go to the Institute, so you just ignore it. And you just like, well, I hope they snap out of it. And so I think that's where, my family situation found themselves as, what do you do about this? And, unfortunately, it was, that kind of thing of even, we had a house where the master bedroom was kind of on one side, and my brothers and my bedrooms were on the other side of the house, living room and kitchen kind of in between. but you could hear the arguing through the heat vents, and I still remember lying in bed and you can hear it coming through the heat vents in that kind of reverby kind of way. So it wasn't even just arguing, it was kind of like that ghostly arguing. And it's odd when you're, 13, 14 and still very impressionable. On top of knowing that my mom struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts because she told me, which is probably not the most appropriate thing to tell a child or a teenager. And so again, it's that not only just maybe genetic component and even a cellular DNA component. I mean, they've done research that showed the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors have a marker for fear.
Yeah, trauma passes through the DNA.
Yeah, it does. That people, grandchildren of people who were in the Holocaust do not have. And so, whether it's a genetic thing that, of course, epigenetics doesn't mean it's going to get turned on, but whether genetic people are just mirroring this is what you do with your sadness, or reaching out for help and not getting it.
Yep.
Or, not having the support group. Or not feeling that you have the support group that are friendships that can go that deep.
Yep.
In high school, you just want to go have fun, go to the movies, go out and, do something, talk about serious problems. But what I did notice was interesting about my home is my mother made it very safe. And I know I seem to be talking like it wasn't a safe environment. My mother made it very, very safe. And all my, I mentioned before, I went to a Baptist-run high school, but it was like 45 minutes away. I had to drive 45 minutes to go to high school. But the Episcopal church I was at was right up the street. If it was a Methodist church, we probably would have been Methodist. And of course, there's a high school right across the street. I could have gone to high school 5 blocks away, but instead I had to drive 45 minutes. But all my friends were at the church, and they all had struggling homes. And so they all ended up at my mom's house. They'd always come over because back then Costco was just coming out. Not until how long ago that was, but Costco was a new thing. So you'd go and you get all the soda and the chips and the cookies and the things, and had People magazine, and we had HBO, and so my brother and I never got to go anywhere. Yeah, because everybody wanted to come to our house because it was safe. And she didn't help you either. You get your own soda, you get your own snacks. She's not going to serve you. She'll buy it for you, and she'll please help yourself, but she's not going to serve you. And it made a very welcoming, comfortable, safe home, I guess, unless you lived there.
Well, and I think what's really powerful about even the way you just communicated your own story is the number of people that minimize or dismiss or just immediately say like, oh, I had a phenomenal upbringing. It couldn't be anything from my childhood. Right. But yet what you also can acknowledge and recognize is all the unconscious components just in terms of energy, in terms of words, in terms of behaviors, in terms of patterns, in terms of genetics, that all can actually create these feelings and sensations or beliefs within us. And so why I say that's powerful is you're like, yeah, okay, we grew up in a really safe environment. My mom did create a safe environment. I can fully own and acknowledge that. By the way, that's no different than my ability to sit here and say that my parents are probably the reason I have function of my arm, that their choice to stay married was a huge commitment that also had other ripple effects just because of what it is, because trauma tears these things apart. I had a really privileged childhood and tons and tons and tons of support. But oh, by the way, I also grew up in a household where there was one right way to do everything, and I didn't always know what that right way was, right? There's little subtleties to all parts of our stories that can manifest into our lived experience in reality. And that's what you chose to break. You've been married for 34 years now yourself. Right? You are a father of kids and have watched them grow and develop. You made a choice to create improvement in your life. What was the difference that your wife saw? And over what period of time was that evolution? And how have these tools you've learned been integrated both in your marriage as well as in your role as a father?
My wife was quite the rock. And I'm sure we started off as a very codependent relationship. We met when we were 19, and we are turning 57 this year, and we're recording this. And so that's a lot of growth. That's a lot of time together. And there's obviously a connection there that binds us to a relationship, ups, downs, goods, bads, just, good times, bad times. And it's that, I think, love for each other, that desire to just make sure the other's all right, if that makes any sense, that the other's doing well. And she had a rough time. I'm sure there were probably times like, this guy with his depression, I'm sure it's not the funnest time to be around me in the 1990s. And we have fun. It's not like it was just, doom and gloom the entire time. But there are days where just like I'm spiraling, and she was there to help. You find the supplements. Oh, look, I was reading this article about 5-HTP. That's a really interesting supplement. It seems to be helping a lot of people. Why don't we go down to the health food store and see if they have it? It's that kind of thing, because there's just that partnership. And to me, that was actually kind of new, because I think by the time I needed that in my late teens, my parents were done. And not just like with each other. And to this day, they're still friendly. They still have bank accounts together and all this. But, and there's still kind of a community down there where they live in San Diego with my brother and his kids. And now his kids are having kids. But I didn't feel like I had that support of like, hey, how do you go buy a car?
Yeah.
Or what's with health insurance? Or like, here's how you invest money, or, there wasn't that by the time I was in my teenage years, needing to learn that. So I really felt on my own. And I think what struck me about when I met Christina was like, here's somebody who I can connect with and open my heart to.
Yeah.
And it felt safe to do that. And of course, 19 to 29 is a huge change, let alone 19 to 57. So we work on it. Yeah. And whether it's just reading relationship books or going to workshops or doing couples counseling or whatever we need to do, it's what I said, I think at the very beginning at some point, it's that striving to be better and doing better. But there's still stuff in my life. It's not like everything's, rainbows and unicorns. My dad's turning 93 in a month. And I still wish we had a relationship that, like you see on TV, in the old, TV shows from the 50s and 60s, where you had a father who seemed to care. And I think, and that hurts when just through even physical evidence that they don't.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that my brother and I remind him of the bad times or, what is it? It's just I can't talk to him about it. And because it's not that relationship.
Yeah.
And so, I have reached out and kind of made my points here and there when I'm, I go to a warrior weekend and, let's walk over the fire and let's, really get some personal growth going and become better at being ourselves, and reach out and say, Dad, what's going on with this? And it maybe improves for a month or two, but then it goes back to the way it was. And so that hurts.
Yeah.
And so there's still work to be done. And it's frustrating, and it's extraordinarily disappointing and frustrating. And maybe it informs to a great extent how I want to be a father and how I want to support my son and be there for him. And hopefully I am, it's that idea of, you're either going to be exactly maybe like your parents or the exact opposite kind of thing. And I hope I'm doing a more complete job of supporting my son and being there for him.
Yeah.
I hope. But it's that thing of, like the other day, he called and I was like in the car. I'm like, oh my God, my dad's calling. So that freaked me out in the middle of the afternoon. My dad doesn't call in the middle of the afternoon. Well, he doesn't call at all. But he called in the middle of the afternoon. And that freaked me out because he never calls me. And that frightened me. Yeah. And so I see it's my dad. I call. I was like, hello, what's going on? He's like, did you just call me? I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, I just got a call from 928, my area code. So it must have been like a spam call or something. So I just wanted to see if you called me. I just want to make sure it wasn't you. I was like, no, it wasn't me. Okay, I got to go. Bye. Like, oh, okay, there you go. That was like the first time he's called me in like years.
Yeah.
And it was like, and we used to, my mom, oh, there's some Freudian for you. My wife, Christina, in the 1990s, we used to laugh at how fast my dad could get off. I mean, I've laughed at tears and clown, but used to laugh at how fast he would get off the phone. I'd talk to my mom for 45 minutes, an hour every week. This is going on, that's going on. Hey, did you hear about this news, that news, or whatever? And we talk at least once a week. And my dad would call him once a month, and we used to like just time as a joke, like how fast is he going to get off the phone? And it's like, again, it's like the tears of a clown. It's funny, but it's like, that's painful.
Yeah. Do I have permission to reflect something back to you?
Yeah, go for it.
I think it's fascinating. A few things, because I often tell people there is no final destination, just constant evolution of self, right? And stuff surfaces all the time, right? So clearly you're even representing that because you're in a place where you help people get out of pain, but that doesn't mean that you don't experience pain or have things pop up that tap into old pain that you may or may not have even known was there. That is all a part of the contrast and the dynamic in life that I think is so powerful. It's interesting because this association with the relationship that you have with your dad, the idea that you might have called him and the fact that he called you actually expresses the level of care that he has.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's also interesting because of this whole concept of communication, right? We are often in positions where we, to improve ourselves, have to learn how to better communicate with ourselves and to better communicate with those around us. But obviously older generations that had even less tools, exposure, understanding, and knowledge than we did had even less tools and even less ability to do it. And so it's again, in this whole dynamic of contrast between your ability to help people get out of pain and the reality that you still experience it. So do I. I still get shame moments and anger moments and, hurt moments. It happens. It's a part of being a human. But the other side to this is the contrast between this desire or belief that dad doesn't care, dad doesn't want to talk, dad doesn't these things, yet the second he thought you were trying to reach out to him, he wanted to make sure you were okay. Yeah. Right. And so that also is the interesting dynamic about just this human experience, is that both can be true and your lived experience can still be emptier than you desire. Yeah. And so I want to thank you for your vulnerability and going a little bit deeper with us, because I actually believe that for those of us that are healers as well, it's actually showing the humanity that we exist in and experience in our own lives that gives others even more power to explore it for themselves. And it's not that we're broken, it's that we're human. Yeah. And we have these moments that we feel and experience, right? And so I really appreciate that. I have one more question on the personal side. And then I want to kind of bring this conversation to an end and highlight what one of your programs is around helping people with testing, utilizing a lot of these mentalities, because I want you to have the opportunity to tell people about this and how they can experience some of it. But we've talked about since the beginning, this area that, when we get into a protective state, I think you alluded to some of it with what you just shared, but where are you consciously or unconsciously still protecting yourself today?
Oh, wow. I think the reason your questions about family maybe triggered a lot of my responses and the way I responded is because I know it's coming to an end with my father. And it's not just it's just a fact of life.
He's 93.
He's not the healthiest man in the world. His younger brother and older brother passed in around 94 for his older brother, 92 for his younger brother, or 91, I guess. And so it's not that I'm wishing ill upon him. It's just like,
it's just the realization of that's all.
He's probably not making it to 102. And so we're looking at, a couple of years. And it's realizing that, okay, out of my 57 years, there's maybe 2 left. What are the chances that this gets better? And as, of course, people get older and they're he's now kind of in a assisted living kind of place. And he's pretty mobile and things, but it's minimal care, but there's people around and to help him. He's not living on his own. And he seems to be thriving there, which is excellent. But it's that, his memory's not as good anymore. And it said, and I get it. And logically, I can write it on a whiteboard and say bullet points and this, that, and the other thing. The reason he hasn't remembered my birthday in the last 3 or 4 years, because he's old. And it's not that he has dementia or anything. God bless that situation. But it's just, he's getting older. He's probably not watching the calendar. He doesn't know it's necessarily July. It's just Tuesday and it's time to go to the doctor's appointment and it's Wednesday. So he has breakfast with his friends. In terms of it's July 18th, it's like that kind of brushes.
Did you say
over
July 18th is your birthday?
Yeah.
Mine's July 19th.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And my daughter's the 24th, but the 19th and 18th, I thought was interesting.
That's odd.
Yeah.
And so again, it's that thing of logically, I can understand it and I can discuss it with, oh yeah, I see you got a card from your mom and your friends and all that. And it's like, well, did your dad not send you a card? It's like, no.
Yeah, but you still feel it.
It hurts.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think I said maybe at some point during our discussion there's a certain relentlessness to this work.
Agree.
And especially if you have the extraordinarily challenging situation of having an elderly parent with dementia who may not even remember who you are. That's gotta hurt.
Yep.
God, that's gotta hurt.
I witnessed it with my mom. My grandma has Alzheimer's.
Oh my God, it's gotta be awful. And especially if you have a very close relationship, that's gotta be awful. I can imagine what that kind of pain is. And so it's not that once you do hypnotherapy or you do coaching, that all of a sudden life is all rainbows and unicorns and everything smells like roses. It just maybe allows you to come to the challenges. And when the hurt does come, you know what to do about it.
Yeah. And again, thank you for being so real, because I think that those are also the misconceptions that take place for therapists, for hypnotherapists, for coaches, it's like, well, they must not experience these things.
Right.
No. Right. Like what I love that you say there's a relentlessness, because I have often said we need to be vigilant in our efforts because these triggers and the depth of them never goes away. Right. Yeah. It's the amount of time we spend in them. Yeah. Right. I used to live in that low frequency energy and emotion for months and years. And then it was days and months. And then it was hours and days. Then it was minutes and hours. And often when I'm in a place of trigger now, or I feel pain, most of the time it's minutes and moments before I'm able to understand it, accept it, identify it. And oh, by the way, that also isn't something that I'm saying happens every time, because there's also sometimes that I need to feel it deeper. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so it's then becoming the choice, to your point, know what to do about it. Yeah. Whether and how I can compress time to move through it faster, or where I need to unpack it deeper so that this pattern starts to go away faster. Yeah. Right. And you bring so many accessible elements to this concept of hypnotherapy that I think are grounding for it as a practice. And I just appreciate the way that you live it and the way that you teach it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I think, we're wired to feel the full spectrum of emotion. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with anger. There's nothing wrong with fear. Fear and anxiety is really helpful. That keeps you from walking down that dark alley at midnight, even though it's a shortcut home. Or, here in the desert, you're walking out in nature, a beautiful place out in the gorgeous desert, and there's a rattlesnake in the trail. It's not your friend. Yeah. Move away from that. And that fear and that anxiety is going to keep you from that. Read the books of the Dalai Lama. He talks about the anger and the sorrow and despair of what's, not only what's going on in Tibet, but the world in general. But, Chinese government still bulldozing down his monasteries, to build roads and railroads and buildings, and probably mainly just to give him the middle finger. And they're arresting his monks, torturing his monks. Of course, that's going to cause, and it's a natural human response to an extraordinary situation. He was exiled out of Tibet in like 1958 or 57 or something like that. So that's going to cause a lot of anger and sorrow and despair. He just doesn't want that to be who he is. Yeah. So every day, even at, 90 years old, something like that, every day he practices loving kindness and compassion. He's relentless about it. Yeah. And he's unmarried. He doesn't have kids. He has a staff of people to meet his every need and want. And granted, he has great responsibility, but he doesn't have a lot of the life challenges that you and I have and everybody watching has. And yet he's still doing the work. Bruce Lee was practicing martial arts every day.
That's right.
Any Olympic athlete who's operating on that level and winning the medals is still training every day. And so again, there's a certain relentlessness to this, whether you're the Dalai Lama meditating on loving kindness and compassion, you're an athlete, you're in business, an entrepreneur, whatever you're doing, there's a certain relentlessness to this. And that means every day, what do you need to do to get yourself in state?
Yeah.
If you got that meeting with the investors, you got clients who are unhappy because of this or that and the other thing, and you got to get yourself out of bed and make sure the bills are paid.
That's right.
And get the kids to school, and and you're struggling because your elderly mother is dealing with dementia. And that how do you get yourself out of bed? It's a relentlessness. And it's like, okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes for some self-care, whatever that is for you. And maybe it's screaming into the pillow, or maybe it's kickboxing the bag in the garage, or whatever it is. Just find the ways you need to do this. And there's extraordinarily so many different options out there.
Yeah, there are.
And that's what's great about the access we have. And, even things like finding out more, like do a deep dive. Don't believe me about therapeutic hypnosis. Go do the research, do your own due diligence. I'm sure a lot of you, everybody listening, there's a lot of you who know about Google Scholar. And if you go to regular Google, there's a subsection of that only searches research papers that have been published in peer-reviewed medical and scientific journals. So if you go to regular Google and type in Google Scholar, the first result you get is scholar.google.com. You click on that, type in whatever you're looking for, hypnotherapy and anxiety, hypnosis and pain control, whatever it is you want to look for. And doesn't even have to be that. Do whatever you want to look for. And all it searches are research papers in medical journals and scientific journals. You see thousands upon thousands of research studies, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, amongst, Oxford and Cambridge and all the other places. There was one that was released last 2023 from Frontiers of Psychology, 20-year meta study on hypnotherapy that showed a 99.2% success rate. And it's just not me throwing out numbers. That is literally what the article says. You can find it on National Institutes of Health. 20, and not just one study. That's 20 years of looking over hundreds of studies.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. It's an amazing percentage in terms of outcome. I really appreciate that. I told you that I wanted to highlight real quick as we wrap this conversation with this program that you have around being able to ace any test. And I have to also acknowledge it's not doing it any justice in the few minutes that we're going to talk about it. And so what I would love at the highest level is if you could just describe what it is, how can people access it, and who is it ideally for?
Sure.
If you can answer those couple of questions, we're going to have all the resources for it attached in the show notes so people can go do more research and information. But I would love for you to be able to at least feature it.
It's all about eliminating test anxiety, building confidence around taking tests. And ironically enough, it wasn't working with high school students. It was actually working with professionals who had to take the one that really stuck out that showed me that this is an issue was someone who wanted to become an audiologist. She had her master's degree. She went to graduate school. She's top of the class. But because of the issues of graduate school and also being in a school where everybody was a top 1%er, this anxiety started. And so she wasn't able to start her career as an audiologist, did all the training, wanted to niche, help children, hear. How extraordinary is that? And she did the training, tens of thousands of dollars in training, a year of her life being this, and she couldn't pass the test, the licensing test, the certification exam. Starting salary was $80,000. And she just couldn't pass the test. And that's not only just frustrating, it's humiliating. I didn't pass again. And it's $600 per test. So whether, bar exam, it's getting the MCATs or LSATs to get into law school or medical school, plumbers, electricians, firefighters, a 65-year-old who wants to start a second career as a real estate agent, hasn't taken a test in 55 years. There's this fear of failure, fear of being judged. And it gets really highlighted when you have to take a test. So it's not just the high school students taking the SAT or even junior high school students or wherever they start nowadays doing the big tests. It's anybody from, 13 years old to 113. But it's a online training course to use these tools that I learned to deal with my own anxiety and depression, only focus specifically on test anxiety. And again, when you think of tests, you're thinking about the math test or, taking the bar exam or something like that. But what about an audition? If you're an actor or a musician, a job interview, public speaking, again, a lot of fear, failure, fear of being judged. So it's a course built around dealing with the anxiousness and nervousness around tests and building confidence around that. aceanytest.com.
aceanytest.com. We'll make sure that the resources are there. I think it's fair to say, and you expanded it at the very end, which I was really happy you did. This is really performance anxiety.
Yeah.
It's really the fear and anxiety that comes on the tail end of what it means if I don't hit a certain mark, if I don't get accepted, if I don't pass the test, I don't know enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not, right? All the narratives that are attached to it. And so I'm so happy that you expanded it because yes, it's designed for test taking, but I would really like to encourage anyone who's listening to really look at this around any area that they get fear or anxiety as it relates to showing up and performing in their life. Right? Because it is a performance anxiety and the fear of shame and judgment that keeps us trapped. Again, that protection is actually the energy that blocks our ability to even be successful on the test. Yeah. Right.
Well, and this is one of the things we even touched upon a little bit ago about what should we have learned in school? And a part of the issue with, I think, test anxiety in terms of the people I worked with one-on-one is at some point down the line, they got punished for failing.
Yes.
A test should be just like, oh, you don't know the times tables in the 5th grade? Okay, well, let's work on that. Let's get you a tutor. We'll do the extra work to make sure you know those things instead of, oh, you got an F and now you're grounded and you can't do this and you can't go out with your friends and you got in trouble with your parents. And now that you training on fearing the test is now ingrained. And now you're 22 going to graduate school, you're 30 you're getting your PhD. And you have to do your oral, defense for your PhD. You're in graduate school trying to maybe get into medical school, and it's so overwhelming. The fear of being judged and being punished for not, the material, backwards and forwards. You can teach it, but to put it on a piece of paper is excruciating, and it's extraordinary what we'll do to ourselves.
Well, and not to mention the generations of people like myself, who, though I'm still not, I believe I am based on everything I know about my kids and everything I understand about it now, but all the decades and generations of people that were undiagnosed dyslexic, undiagnosed on the autism spectrum that had some block that might be there, undiagnosed around sensory issues that might, or all these accommodations that are now available for certain people that would have created even more anxiety and fear because there's a legitimate neurological block in some cases to be able to perform the task or duty at hand. And so again, there's all these little nuances to these belief systems that we create. But what I love is that you're giving tangible tools to help people understand again what to do about it. And that's what it comes down to is it's not that we're broken. It's not that something's wrong. It's not that we need to be fixed. It's that we all experience this stuff. We're just not taught how to process it and how to move through it. And you and so many others are creating different pathways that create these healing modalities to be accessible. And so for that, I just want to say thank you. And I'm grateful for you being here with us today. If there was a closing thought that you wanted to leave people with your last glimmer of wisdom, what would it be?
Well, Brian, first, thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm so glad we got to do this in person. The one thing I'd say, and we've all heard some form of this in one way or another, but we all fall. The failure comes is when you don't get back up again. And again, as I've said a dozen times already in the time we've been talking, there's a relentlessness. Just, you may be feeling great on Monday and Tuesday and something happens on Wednesday. It's not over. Just keep going, do the work you need to do, and you'll cycle out of it. It's the holding on to the hurt and pain. That really trips us up.
I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And for those of you that just watched Craig flip open his lid, he even had a little bit of resistance, right, to wanting to go there for the nature of talking about his own vulnerable things. But at the same time, he did, right? He talked about the dynamics that created these patterns, but it came to a head when he had to decide, when he had to make a choice that he was no longer going to be defined by the patterns of his past, but instead start to break them down and learn the tools he needed to apply consistently to overcome them. Here's the reality, whether it's neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, if it's hypnotherapy, if it's coaching, if it's talk therapy, if it's contrast therapy, if it's Reiki energy healing, I don't care what the modality is. There's thousands of them out there. And if you no longer want to experience pain and suffering, I don't care if it's spiritual, mental, physical, or emotional, it is possible to move through it, but it is going to require you to want to seek in and stand in your truth. And it is going to require you to want to have the intent, like Craig said multiple times, to heal. With the intent to heal, the power that made the body can heal the body, but it is going to require you to flip open your lid and scan your can.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.